Okay, Happy New Year. So I assume you've all been busy over Christmas finishing off your assignments? Oh dear. Okay, never mind. Right, okay. Last term, apologies for my absence. I was ill last term, but now we're back and running. Your second assignment is due this time next week. You have 7 days and 11 hours. Which, allowing for lack of sleep and food, you should just about have enough time to get it done. Now that's the 4 lab tasks. You should have completed labs 1, 2 and 3. Remember, I make it very easy for you. I'll give you 1 lab task each week. As long as you complete the 1 task each week, you will be okay and pass the module. If you start falling behind, you're going to cause problems to yourself when you get the assignments finished. What I want to do today is talk about working with forms, because what I want to do is make sure I hit the biggest target possible in the hour and give you as much information as I possibly can in the time I've got with you. So we're going to talk about forms. We're going to talk about forms as in how we build the forms in HTML, and I'm also going to spend some time showing how we use PHP to process forms and pass data through, and show you the kind of the strategy I would adopt when it comes to writing server-side scripts and forms. There's several other ways of doing this, but this is probably the easiest and the cleanest way of achieving what you need to achieve. So you've come across forms before, but it's worth having a recap, because when we build our forms, we need to build them in such a way as we can pass the data through to our processing scripts. So all a form is a series of HTML elements which capture user input. So radio buttons, checkboxes, text boxes, text areas, buttons, etc., etc. So what we have to do, we have to consider how we lay the stuff out and how we validate it. We're going to come on to form validation in the next assignment, because form validation is carried out using client-side scripting. So we're going to spend a session, probably session 2 of the next cycle, looking at form validation and how we make sure the right data gets passed through to our processing script. So the key here is the form element, the HTML form element. This has to contain all the different form elements you want. So if you want radio buttons, checkboxes, drop-down lists, etc., they have to be inside this pair of form tags. If they're not inside the form tags, when you hit the submit button, it'll ignore any element that's not inside the form tags. Now, what you'll notice is each form has a name. Now, when we're doing server-side scripting, the name doesn't matter. When we do client-side scripting, we need to have the form name in our script. So we need to have a name that makes sense. The action is where do we want the data to go to? And in our form, we're going to have a processing script, a special page. Doesn't display anything, it simply takes the data, inserts stuff into databases, checks data, and then bounces the user somewhere else so they can continue what they're doing. And the bit at the end, the method, that is very important. If you say method equals get, it'll put all the form data in the address bar, which is okay if you've got a couple of bits and pieces, a couple of values, but if you've got someone typing a feedback, an evaluation, which could be 100, 200, 400, 500 characters long, you don't want it in the address bar. So we're going to use method equals post to post our data through. And obviously I need to show you how we capture that post data to do something with it. So we're going to be using post, and we're going to, if I turn it around a bit, you can see better there, can't you? So we're going to be using post, and we're going to send our data to a PHP script, which is going to process our data. Okay, quick fly through the different types of input we can have. Input type equals text is going to give you a text box. Input type equals password is going to give you a text box with the dots to represent the password. So if you're doing a login form, you need to make sure you set the password to type equals password. It just contains the text, but just doesn't display it on the screen, so someone can't look at what you've typed in. So notice how each of the form elements has a name. Now, those names are important. The form name isn't important, but the input names are important because each input has to have a different name. That's how we're going to recognise the data. That's how we're going to tell what data is what. So I put name equals UN and name equals PW because I didn't want to type too much. But you must make sure that every form element you put inside those form tags has a unique name. No unique name means we can't get the data, which makes it pretty pointless. Now, labels. Look carefully at the syntax for adding labels in HTML5. It's changed. If you've done old HTML, HTML4 or below, labels weren't really well thought out. The label tag surrounds the input tag. Can you see that? So we can associate the label with that particular input. And we do it that way, first of all because we're told to do it that way, because that's the correct way of doing it, but most importantly, it means you can format the label and the label appears around the text box, doesn't it? So you can style it nicely if you do it that way. Okay, if you want multiple lines, you can either put them in lists, ordered lists, and hide the bullets, or you can put them in paragraphs, tags, whatever you want to do, okay, to display things in several lines. Right, now, when we do client-side scripting, we can create special forms that don't require a button to submit them. We can have a form that as you type in things in, it's automatically sending it through to the server, and that's called AJAX. And we'll cover that in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, if we're sending form data to the server, we need to have a button, input type equals submit. Don't give it a name. If you give it a name, it'll pass the button data, where the word submit, to the processing form. We don't want that. All we want is the username and password in this case. So do not give the button a name. Anything without a name just gets ignored by the processing script, which is what we want. And what happens when we click that button, it submits all the data the user's typed in, and it sends it to submit.php in this case. It's as simple as that. Whatever your action is, that's where the data will get sent. Okay, so keep that in your mind while we go to the next stage, when we show you how to process. That's the processing script. There's all sorts of controls. Look, now in HTML5 we've got type equals range to give you a slider. See, we've got type equals number, which means you can just have numerical data. So you haven't got to do so much validation. You can just have up and down arrows. It ignores characters. And if that's on the phone screen, that number field, it'll give you the number pad on the phone screen automatically. So HTML5 has a lot more useful controls than the old versions, and the controls have kind of built-in validation sometimes. That slider is quite useful. If you want a numerical value, slider's perfect, isn't it? No typing. But obviously it'd be nice to know what the slider's set to, which I haven't put on there. So this is the perfectly formed HTML form. According to all the rules, all the guidelines are all combined into this slide. And what you'll notice is a couple of things. First of all, I can break my form into sections using something called a field set. Then you can colour the backgrounds in different colours. Also, when we do JavaScript, you can hide the form in sections. So as they finish the first section, you can collapse it up and open the next section for them to fill in. So using field sets allows you to group things together and display the information in a nicer way to the user. Each field set has a legend, which is the little bit of text that appears next to the field set. Again, it helps the user fill the form in. And the absolutely correct way of putting form elements in a form is to use an ordered list. And we use an ordered list because if someone has visual impairments using a screen reader, it reads the items out in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Does that make sense? So it's a sequence, isn't it? They've got to go through, and by putting things in an ordered list, it enforces that sequence. That this is a sequence of fields to fill in. And the screen reader will go through in order and collect the data from the user. And so basically, without any styling at all, it looks like that. Boxes, the legend appears across the top edge of the border, and so on, and you can see. But obviously you can style this to your heart's content. You can move the legend down a bit so it's inside the box. You can change the fonts, the background colours, remove the borders, do drop shadows, whatever you want to make the form easier to understand. But behind the scenes, the HTML should look something like that. That is the correct HTML for a form. Okay, so that's the form stuff. That's a quick kind of skip over. You probably knew most of that. It was just a few extra bits and pieces just to clarify things. Now we get onto the meat of this session. This is how we're going to process the form data. And basically, this is the process we're going to go through. The form is your HTML form, like I've just shown you. It's going to send the data to a processing script, but the processing script displays nothing on the screen. It's just PHP. It's just a bit of code. When it's processed the form data, you have what's called a redirect on that script, which bounces the user to what I've termed the landing page. So let's imagine you've got a list of items in your shop, and you want the user to add a new item. The form might be a button on the list of items page, or it might pop a new window up of some sort. The processing script would sit there in the background, and the landing page might be back to that list view with the extra item added to the bottom, so they can see they've added the item. Or the landing page might be a summary view saying this is the item you just added to the list. Click here to go back to the list view. So the three-step process is the way I would recommend doing this. It's clean, it separates out the different functions into different scripts, and it makes your debugging a lot easier. Right, recap. You always use post with your forms. The only reason we use get, in fact, I can't think of a single good reason to use get in our forms, the sort of thing we're doing. So there's my form. I've got username and password, so first name and last name I should say. Both type equals text, name equals first name, name equals last name, and the submit button. I'm going to take you through the process of handling this data. And I'm going to take you through a step-by-step approach, rather than just giving you the answer. So you can apply what I'm showing you to your particular forms. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to send the data to our processing script. So this code goes in the processing script. It goes on the, where the data ends up. And all the data is stored in a special associative array called $_post, capital post. And that contains all the keys and the values. So I've got a field called username. That's my key. Whatever I type into that username box becomes my value. I've got a box called last name. So the key is last name and the value is whatever I've typed in. A bit like that. That should give you a pretty clear understanding of what's going on with the data. So I have this associative array which I can print out using print_r. The array contains two values. Can you see that? The first value is Mark, and that's tied to a key called first name, which was the name of my form, of my text box, wasn't it? And I've got another value called Tyres, which is tied to last name. So let's go back a slide or two, and that's tied to the input name equals first name, and input name equals last name. So it's remember the names of the form elements, and because my submit button didn't have a name, it simply gets ignored. It doesn't matter. Button doesn't matter, does it? It's the data I want. And once I know it's working, I would recommend you use printr in your script, your processing script, to make sure the data's being passed through properly. You can access any of those values individually by specifying the key. So $_post first name will give me the text Mark. $_post last name will give me the word tyres. Okay, you see how that works? So I can retrieve the values, and once I've got the values, I can put them into an SQL statement. You know an insert statement? Insert into users, brackets first name, comma last name, values, and I can put these two values into my SQL statement. If I run the SQL statement, it'll insert the data into the database. Now, so really, that's the key. Getting the data into the processing script and then using that processing script to generate an SQL statement, an insert or an update statement, run the statement, and then what? What's my next step? I've inserted the data. What do I need to do next? You get it back out here and take the user to a landing page somewhere, don't we, so they can see they've done it properly. So what we need to do, once the form data is processed, we need to automatically jump the web browser to a new page without the user having to click on continue or OK. That processing script, the user won't even know it's there. It'll send the data, run the processing script, send the user to the landing page. Yeah, all in the background. And that's how we send users to a different page automatically. There's a special function called header, and we specify the page we want to send the user to. All right, so that basically will bounce the user to products.php, and it'll be so fast, it'll look like they've gone from the form straight to products.php in one jump. The user won't even see a flicker, it'll just be instantaneous. So the key here is you're going to take your form data, you're going to post it through to your processing script, and you're going to, once you've processed the data and added it to the database, you're going to bounce the user through to the landing page. Now I was going to put a whole load on databases and inserting, but we did that one before, didn't we? We've talked to you about insert, select update, insert, delete, all that sort of stuff. All you've got to do is build your SQL statements used by stringing bits of string and variables together into a nice long SQL statement. So that's how we have to do it. Now, I'm going to talk to you next about login. Because one of the key forms you're going to build, I suspect, on your website is going to be a login form. And we need to make sure that the user doesn't access your data, your pages, your forms, unless they are logged in. That's what we're trying to achieve. So I've shown you the forms, I've shown you how to process the data. I need to show you now something very important. HTML is stateless, which basically means every request you make to a web server is treated completely separately. It has no memory of what you did on the last request. It has no memory of what you did in the request before that. Every request is treated on its own, individually. And that means you've got a problem, because let's imagine you log in. The next time you make a request, it doesn't remember any of that. Every state, every request is completely... Really? I think you need to change your ringtone. We've got a problem, haven't we? Because if every request is separate, the request to log in gets processed. The next request to access to add a new record won't have any record of them logging in. So we need to have some flag somewhere in the system which says the user's logged in, the user's not logged in. Now, there's two ways you can do this. The first way I'm going to show you today uses a server-side system approach. The second way I'm going to show you, which is in the next assignment, is you can use cookies, or the modern equivalent of cookies, session variables, JavaScript. So I'm going to show you both. I'm going to show you the PHP, the server-side approach today, and in a couple of weeks' time I'll show you how to do the same thing using client-side code. But the end result's the same. And we're going to use something called a PHP session to handle this. So the idea is, as soon as the user logs in, we need to put a little flag on the server to say this user is logged in. And then when they do try and access a page, we check to see if the flag's there. If the flag is there, we give them access to the forms and the data. If the form's not there, we need to redirect them. Like that. That's a little diagram to try and explain the process here. So first of all, let's imagine they try and connect to the secure content. So in other words, they go to that web page. Okay? This box represents the secure content. In other words, at the top of your web page that you want to secure, you have to have a test to see if they're logged in. So they come in here when they try and access the page. The first question is, are they logged in? Is the session set? Does the session exist? And that's just an if statement, a PHP if statement. So if the session exists, display all my secure content to them. If the session doesn't exist, it means they're not logged in. So we do a redirect, an automatic redirect, remember that header thing I showed you before, and bounce them straight to the login screen. In other words, they won't even see that page at all. As soon as they try and access the page, they'll get presented with a login box to log into the website. Then they type in their credentials and they go to the processing script. And there's two possibilities, aren't there? If the credentials are wrong, we need to bounce them straight back to the login form again. And again, all that will happen is they click on login and it'll stay on the same screen. It's so quick, they won't even see any flicker, any change. If the credentials are correct, we need to set the session variable to say they're logged in and redirect them back to our secure page. And of course, this time, the session is set and they'll be able to see the secure content. So can you see this process? It's very similar to the process I showed you for any form processing, where you've got the form screen, you've got the processing script, and then you've got the content, the landing page. But this approach means they can never access secure content unless they're logged in. So the idea is we store user information on the server. So if they're logged in, you might store their username on the server, or their name, or a URL of their avatar or something. You can store anything in these session variables. Then when they go back to the secure content, we check to see if the username's there or the content and so on. This is the key. This is how we set a session. The most important thing is the first line of PHP code in your script, your processing script, or your secure content page must be session start. If you put a single white space before that session start, it won't work. So you put the opening PHP tags, you then straight away put session start. No spaces, no tabs, no nothing. Very important, because as soon as a white space comes, it'll display the white space and then it's lost its chance to use sessions. And then all we have to do is, instead of $_post, which you use for the post data, we have $_session. And you can create as many session variables as you want. So I've got a session variable called logged in. So $_session logged in equals true. That's a nice easy flag, isn't it? Boolean. Then I can test to say if $_session logged in equals true, display the secure content, else redirect to the login page. If I want to delete a session, because you want to log out button on your screen to log out, all you have to do is set the session variable to null, and that deletes it. So you can create session variables and you can delete session variables. And the idea is you use session variables to control whether someone is logged in or not. And better than using true or false, you might have another session variable called username and store the person's username in a separate variable. So when they come to insert a record, insert a new product or review, you can flag their username, use their username and insert that into the database against the review. So this is very simplistic, just using true or false. So this is how we do server sessions. So here's a couple of tests. There's two tests we can carry out. Does the session variable actually exist? And what's it set to? So the first one is we use the isSet function, which I'm sure you've used before to see if variables exist. So if isSet $_session logged in, it means it's set to something, true or false, but we don't know which. The second one says, is it set to true? In other words, we can use that to display the secure content, and if it's not set to true, you can redirect to the login page. A better way would be to say if it's equal to false, because then you could have a single line of code with a header redirecting them, and then if they pass that test, you can just simply put the secure content underneath. Because the only way to get past that if statement without being redirected is if they are logged in. So by testing to see if it's false or not set or a combination of the above, you can have a little escape hatch in your secure content page which bounces them to the login page, and then just put that block of code at the top of every secure page. That's all you have to do. 3 lines of code at the top of the page, plus the session start. So 4 lines of code, you've got the complete secure website. You can bounce someone away if they're not logged in. Okay, so we check the credentials. We either send them back to the login screen to get them to log in, or we create the session variable and send the user to the page they want to see. Now, this is the next challenge. This will separate the amateur from the professional web developers. Let's imagine you've accessed the review for anything, for a film, a particular film, and you have to go and log in. Wouldn't it be annoying if once you've logged in, you were sent back to the home page? You don't want to go back to the home page, you want to go back to the review, don't you? So you can post a message. So you go to the Daily Mail website and you want to post a comment, and it makes you log in, then it sends you back to the home page, so you've got to find the article all over again. That's not what we want. So you're going to use one login form for your whole website. So when we have the login form, we need to pass the URL where the person is at the moment to the login form. So when they're logged in, we know what the URL is, where they've come from. Now, actually this is quite important. For security, if you ever do a header, always put a die command afterwards. Because in theory, the old script is still running until it gets to the end of the page. If you put the die command in, it will just terminate the script immediately, which means they'll never get a chance to look at your secure content without logging in. If you don't put it in, hackers can actually access that data. So always put die after your redirects. I mean, the chance is very, very slim they can access that, but why take a chance for 5 characters? You can fix it. Here we are. So when they go to the login form, you can pass the URL in the address bar, can't you, to the login form? But we need to pass that data to the processing script, don't we? So we know where to send the user back to. Well, there's a special input, type equals hidden. It's like type equals text, except it just doesn't get displayed at all. It's completely invisible on the screen. So what I always do, I have input type equals text with the URL while I'm testing my site to make sure it's passing the right data. And when I'm happy, I switch it to type equals hidden. And the user never knows it's there. It's a nice little trick to pass data without the user knowing about it. Before the days of sessions, you had to actually pass the login thing from page to page, otherwise they would get logged out. And this is how you used to hide it in forms. So that's really important, that you know how to pass hidden data. And as you can see, $_server request URI contains the URL of the current page. Nice and easy, isn't it? So you can grab the current URL. It doesn't grab any attributes, any sort of parameters at the end of it, but I'll leave that as an exercise for those of you who want that. Look at the syntax, short PHP syntax I've used. That's how you very quickly drop a little tiny drop of PHP into HTML without having to have big tags opening and closing tags. Less than $equals means insert the variable value that follows. And it just makes the page easy to read. And as you can see, look, when I go to print_r on my processing page, there is my URL passed as a key value pair. So I can use that then to redirect them back to the correct page when I've finished. And there you are. So all I've got to do is, instead of location and a fixed value, I say location $_post URL. And that will take them back to that particular web page. Okay, so that's one of the telltale signs between an amateur website development and a professional one. This thought about how the user is going to interact with the web pages. Okay, we're doing well. The protecting your pages bit, the final step is we need to stop the user from accessing the page unless they're logged in. That's the final step, isn't it, to get this to work. So we're going to put a block of PHP on the top of each of our secure pages. We check for the session variable, and if it's not there, we bounce them seamlessly to the login page, so they get to log into the website. And seriously, that's my script. You can just lift that out and use it. All I'm doing, I'm sending them to the login page, but I'm also passing the current page URL to my processing script. And then my processing script can pass it on and use it as a redirect. Sorry, pass that to the form, then I can use that value in the form, and then I can use the form data to update and send the user to the right page. So it's like a relay race. You're starting off the launch page, the secure page, and you're passing that URL through every single step until you can bounce them back to the correct page. And in this case, I'm simply attaching the URL to the main URL. Very simple way of doing it. So, last screen before we talk about the assignment. That's the screen you should be remembering for login. So if the session is not set, we send them to a login screen. The login screen tests to see if the credentials are correct by using a processing script. And the processing script either sends them back to the login page or it sends them to the secure page and sets the session. So that's the main content for today. I want to catch up on how we're getting on with the assignment now. Because you've got 7 days to finish it off. And in theory, you've got 1 lab left. Am I right? Yeah. No. There should be 1 lab. This coming week is your 4th and final lab for this assignment. Now, I was a little bit worried about me not being here, but you've had some PHP instruction. You've had Tedra, I think, did a PHP session with you. There's so much PHP material online, it's untrue. It's the easiest scripting language in the world to learn, and you've had 3-week break, 3-week holiday to get yourself up to speed with it. So I'm feeling pretty confident with you guys. I'm pretty confident. Should I be? Am I being perhaps overconfident? What's the problem? What's causing the problems? The holidays. You've forgotten everything. Okay, right. You need to. I can't give you any extensions. I did it last year, and I got a formal warning about it. One of the students complained. No, I mean I promised I would not move any assignment deadlines this year. I've had to promise the boss because one student complained that they finished the assignment, and it was unfair on her that others were getting extensions. So I've had to promise that I wouldn't give any extensions. But you've still got 7 days now, allowing for if you don't eat or sleep. We might just about pull this off. No, seriously, how the database I presume was pretty straightforward because you've done, is it 220? You've done 220. You've done Python, haven't you, this last year? Python last year. Python is PHP is a walk in the park compared to Python. Yeah, seriously. James complains that PHP is too easy as a language. He said I should be using Python instead. PHP, guys, is the simplest language because whatever you want to do, there's thousands of pre-built functions to do almost anything you want to do. You want to capitalize the first letter, you want to grab some form data, there's pretty much a function for everything. Your challenge is figuring out how to string it together to make the website. That's the hard bit. The language itself isn't so hard, yes?
We're not there to worry about the cookies then?
We're not using cookies, we're using session variables on PHP. Well, cookies and session variables are the same thing. Yeah, basically, this whole assignment is server-side scripting only. There's no client-side stuff at all, because that would just be really cool to make you do JavaScript at the same time. When we do the next assignment, which is the client-side one, you're going to be spending some time doing cookies. Cookies is a generic term for any state being stored. We don't even have cookies anymore. In HTML5, cookies don't exist. They're called session variables. So don't worry too much about that. Any other questions? I kind of glossed over things. Where have people got to? Database. Have you managed to get the database tables built for your website? Not yet.
I think it was basically over the Christmas.
Yeah.
Using the school's network, so most people couldn't do it because we're at home.
You can just connect straight to Creative. You know how you connected it from the university?
I thought you can connect from the university.
No, it's completely open.
I've done mine too.
Okay. No, it's completely open. That's the idea of secure shell is access from anywhere. That was the whole reason behind using SSH. PuTTY, because you can connect from anywhere. You can FTP from anywhere, you can secure shell from anywhere, you can access from anywhere. Because otherwise, you know, it'd be a bit unfair, wouldn't it? Okay, so database. Did you manage to get databases done? Brilliant. Okay. The PHP side, displaying stuff from the database table should just be writing a select statement, shouldn't it? Connect to the database, write a select statement, and then cycle through the records. Any other issues? I mean, I'm not going to pick on anyone here because obviously, you know, I wasn't here, so I want to hear if there's any issues with the assignment. Yeah.
There's the issue with importing data from the CSV.
Right. Do you want me to very quickly go through that? Yeah. I'll do that. Let's find the slide. Guys, just bear with me on this one. Where's it gone? Right near the end, isn't it? Right, okay, this is the one, isn't it? This is the command. Right. Okay, now to get this to work, I make a few assumptions. You know when you log into Secure Shell first, and then you log onto the database. The assumption is the folder you're currently in when you log into the database, that's where the CSV file is. So if you put your CSV file in a folder somewhere, subfolder, make sure you navigate to that folder before you log into MySQL, because it only looks in the current folder, the folder you're in. That's maybe one of the issues. Now, the way you import it, you need to make sure that your CSV file is loaded onto the server. The easiest way to do that is to log onto the server and use the Nano editor and actually build this CSV file on the server. You could FTP something up from Excel, but the easiest way is to log on, create a file in Nano, and just add the content to the file. Now, that is the name of your CSV file. That's the first critical information. That is the name of your table that you want to import the data into. Now, these bits, this is saying that every field, every bit of data is separated from the next bit of data with a comma, as in comma-separated variables. And the quotes bit there, that's a single quote, a double quote inside a single quote, is because Excel sometimes puts quote marks around strings in CSV files. And that says you may find there's quote marks around it. And that just tells the database just to remove those quote marks and ignore them. And the last bit which catches people out is every line is a record, yes? And every line is terminated with an enter key, isn't it? A new line character. The reason this catches people out is because every computer in the world uses /n as a special character, a special hidden character, except some programs in Windows, which uses /r. Some versions of Excel use /n, some versions of Excel use /r. It's completely inconsistent. Well, you can tell it's gone wrong because if it can't find /n, it just treats everything as one record. So when you've imported the data, it will say one record imported. And that's a little flag telling you you've got the wrong line ending character. So just delete the record out of your database, so you clear the database again, and substitute /r instead, and it will work. The final assumption I'm making is if you look at the data I'm importing, the column names in my CSV file have to match in the correct order the field names in my database table. So in this one I had an ID, a surname, a first name and a student ID. I have to match those columns and they have to be in the right order. And because my ID column is auto increment, you know, it automatically generates an ID for me when I insert a record, I have to put the word null in my CSV file. And that tells the database to generate that value itself. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, yes? That's how you import data into MySQL. So it looks really simple, And in theory, it should be really simple, but there's so many little catches there that you have to think about when you use it. And that will import your data into your database. Right, are there any other questions about this? Because now might be a good time to ask them. Yes?
Do you have anything on there about foreign keys? Like linking foreign keys?
Yes, I did. Thought I did. I mean, I didn't do too much because you've just done 12 weeks of database, haven't you? So I kind of made a few assumptions. There you are. Added a foreign key. So alter table books, add foreign key genre ID, which is my foreign key, references the ID column in the genres table. And I think when I created the tables, there you are. Let's just go for foreign keys. Here we are. So there's my third table I created, and you can see I've got two foreign keys. First of all, I created a programs and a staff table in this example, and then if I go make it bigger, and then on my third table, I had two foreign keys to reference the other two tables. That's how you do your foreign keys. And the foreign key clauses, which is the more advanced stuff, is what happens if you delete a record. Let's imagine I've got a staff table and I've got a module leader table. If I delete a staff record, obviously the staff references the module leaders. What happens to that module leaders table? And there's three options. Restrict basically says, can't do it because there's a foreign key link here, because it'll end up with a module leader with no module leader. Cascade, which basically says delete the record that matches in the modules table, the module leader table. Or set null, so it keeps the record but sets the foreign key to null to indicate there's a missing value. And depending on what you're trying to do, you'll use different approaches. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that's the full fat version of the module leaders table. So foreign key program references bar on delete cascade on update, because there's deleting and there's also if you change a record, what happens to the other record? Do you cascade it down? Do you stop it from happening and so on? Now, what database did you guys use in 220? Right, well the SQL I'm using here should be absolutely identical to Oracle. There shouldn't be any difference at all. So you should be cool with that. Because the great thing about SQL is it's a standard. It's an open standard. Just like PHP, just like HTML, just like CSS, which means you could switch from Oracle to MySQL today, and next week switch to SQL Server and run exactly the same commands. Any other questions? It's your chance to ask questions. No? Okay, that's it then. Thank you for coming.